Yeah, I'm doing
There
all
we
right.
go.
Oh, sorry.
So, hey everybody, how's it going? This is Ian O'Byrne. This is the sixth episode of Digitally Literate. Digitally Literate was basically an idea that we had a while ago to put together like a meta level show to sit here and talk about and elaborate and pontificate about literacy and technology and all the cool things that we try to make sense of in our world. Um, and so we're rebooting this initiative, and we're trying to make some more sense of it. And I have we got two great people right now that are sitting here chit chatting with us. Um, Brian, you're our guest tonight. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I think I'd better. Yeah, my name is Brian Mathers. I'm a jack of all trades when it comes to digital stuff, I suppose. Originally a programmer, although I don't do much programming anymore. I've run a few companies, and I suppose I spend a lot of my time thinking about education these days. And I do a lot of drawing, I suppose, trying to capture visual thoughts and sort of use visual metaphors quite a bit. So ultimately, I don't really know what I do these days. It seems to be a mashup of all sorts of stuff. And one other thing I should sort of mention is I've started this non-profit that tries to get young people into digital careers that maybe haven't had such a good experience of the education system, but who are very creative.
No, that's pretty cool.
Hmm. Well, I think so.
I think we should share some of well, Brian. First of all, Brian's Twitter feed. We should share that and just have just to show people some of the images. Brian, do you want to pull that up and screen share? I can do that if you want.
Hey, right. Let me see if I can do that. Well, if do you want to share it, and I'll,
Yeah,
or no,
yeah.
if I
Oh, do you want to
talk, I'll
introduce yourself
reshare.
before you share?
Oh,
Yeah, Doug, you
multitasking.
introduce yourself first.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes, I'm jumping the gun here. So my name is Doug Belshaw. I'm web literacy lead for Mozilla. I had the privilege of interviewing Brian a couple of weeks ago, and I'm looking forward to what he's going to say tonight. And Ian, I've worked with Ian on many things, especially to do with literacies and stuff. And so I'm based in the north of England, where it often gets cold, but not as cold as Canada and some of my colleagues. But I wanted to share some of Brian's drawings because I think, Brian, it would be really useful just to talk through some of the process and stuff. I know Ian's got some questions for you. It would be really interesting just to elaborate on the process because it's not just a random collection of stuff that you do. You know, you do have a process and stuff. So um,
Yeah,
here's one in particular. Yeah.
it yeah it I'm afraid it happened very accidentally. If you believe that. I suppose about a couple of years ago. And do you know what happened? I went down from doing 5 days a week to 4 days a week, and I spent one day in my man shed, right? And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made because the one day in my man shed sort of forced me, I suppose, to think out of the box a little bit, right, and to be a little bit more creative. And uh, I I got myself a stylus for the iPad. Somebody else showed me, hey, look, you can stick a stylus in the iPad and you can start drawing stuff. And I suppose I started mucking around, and I think I seem to learn very well through mucking around and trying to. I wonder if I can dot dot dot, sort of curiosity-led learning, I suppose. And uh, I started to try to think of, through my frustration, I was trying to articulate some stuff at that time, and uh, and the stuff that I articulated, people, it was just well received, I suppose, and that gave me the confidence to I suppose to try articulating other stuff, and through a process of, I suppose, practice, it I suppose I developed a style. I find that if I copied other people, I would end up with a really bad version of what someone else's style was.
Mm.
And yet, if I tried to stick to my own way of sort of bringing something to life, that it had its own merits, but often I wasn't happy with it. But it had its own merits, and that different people saw different stuff in it. So, and I suppose it's just been a journey, from there. But
Mm.
it's now developed into a habit, I suppose, in that I quite like to pitch up to a relatively stuffy education meeting, and try to just capture one visual thought. And by the time the meeting's sort of finished, I've drawn it on an iPad. I've brought it into the Mac, and I've sort of topped and tailed it and sort of honed it down, and then I've sort of tweeted it out before the guys finish speaking.
You mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, and I was fascinated by that. The fact that you were, and I don't think you mentioned this explicitly, but it must be something that you're looking for. You're looking for stuff that actually works well visually, that you can draw some kind of comparison, or you can represent visually a particularly pithy quotation. But the fact that you can get it out there, not spend hours, days, whatever, but the creative process, I guess, like is like foreshortened so that you can get it out in the context of the meeting.
Well, often it's funny because some of the best stuff I think I've done is the quickest, right? Where almost because I usually start on paper, right? So because I find that gives me total flexibility. So and I'm always asking, what does that look like? And I think we're visual beings, right? We tend to use sort of words and as a means to obviously communicate between ourselves. But I find that in conversation we often use expressions that are very visual, like, oh, it was such a nightmare, and suddenly it's just I'm picturing a person having a nightmare in the context of whatever it is they were trying to explain by using the word or phrase nightmare. You know what I mean? So we tend to use very visual language at times. So often those are the cues that I tend to try to listen out for. Whenever someone talks about raising the bar of assessment, for example, it's just like, well, I'm picturing a high jump, with a bar being raised, So I suppose I'm trying to allow my brain to wander sideways, but also trying to listen, to some of those visual cues, because people do use them, especially if you get people to talk off the cuff. I think they use them more rather than a document. A document tends to be more sort of straight-laced and seems to use less metaphors. A blog is something in the middle, often, where it's more sort of friendly conversational speech that often has those visual metaphors. So a lot of my best stuff are stuff that's the people have picked up and retweeted, I suppose, has often started in blogs, just because of that. I suppose because of that style.
And you mentioned that you started to. Sorry, Ian, I've just interrupted you.
No. I mean, so do you sit in a meeting and somebody says something, and are you actively waiting for that moment when somebody says something that resonates with you, or are you just sitting in a meeting like all of us do, and our minds idly wander and go to other places, and you're sitting there like, what's the moment? Are you sitting there with paper and a sketch pad?
Yeah, I'll show you. I'll get one of my sketch pads here and see if I can, hopefully without revealing, anything too sensitive.
Show us the secret sauce. It's all right.
Yeah. So let's see. Right. My sketch pads are full of little sort of just black and white doodles like this. I don't know if can you see that. I'm just always trying to sort of ask myself, hey, what does that look like? And
so that 2-page spread, is that one meeting? Is that a couple meetings? Is that a week?
Yeah. So often a meeting will take maybe just a 2-page spread or maybe 2 of those, right? So there's maybe another one there. Look, even I get offended by pages with lines in them now. Because it's saying, hey, start at the top, and your thoughts need to fit into these little lines. And for many years, hey, that's just the way it was. And suddenly I've been freed to think in multiple directions, you know what I mean, with, in a visual way. But that's how it starts. Now, if I'm in a small meeting, that's where I'm able to sort of think sideways and collect those ideas, right? But I suppose the meeting I was talking about earlier on was that, if you go to a sort of a more conferencey type meeting and there's maybe 40, 50 people there, and there's a hashtag. Well, that's just asking for me to try to, create something and pump it in there. And it's you'll soon know whether your image makes any sense to people or not. People will either that makes sense to me, get behind it and engage with it, or they'll totally ignore it. So some of the stuff I've done, people have completely ignored.
So it's almost like an, I don't want to stretch the metaphor too much, but it's almost like an agile development methodology for like how resonant an idea is within a given community. Like it's getting stuff out there and then throwing against the wall and see what sticks to some extent. The question I wanted to ask though was, you mentioned that you start on paper, and I guess you're going to talk about how you move on to the digital. But I'm really interested from a literacy's point of view, like what affordances and benefits and stuff you see from working on paper, and why you don't just stick to paper. Why don't you just scan that in and get some watercolors out or your crayons or whatever? Why does it have to be digital? What's going on with that?
Well, look, that's a succession of good questions there, Doug. Because it's why I'm such a big fan of your digital literacy map, right? Because whenever you started to talk about that sort of stuff, right, that just made complete sense to me, because I'm a jack of all trades, right? I know I've figured out how to use quite a lot of different packages to a certain degree, right? I'm an expert in very, very few of them, right? But that's why I see the digital literacy, map as a landscape. Do you know what I mean? That actually the modern employee, the more skills they have on this map, the better it is for the business they work in. Almost despite the business that they work in, because the business can't see that they need this stuff, right? Because the business is trying to lock down, the systems that people use and it just amazes me that people aren't drawing pictures inside businesses, inside corporates. You know what I mean? As in, there's probably one guy, but he's not allowed to do it. You know what I mean? Or it's like, what drawing? That's not work.
Just medicate that guy to make sure he doesn't do it anymore.
Yeah, it's like emails, writing emails now. That's work, right? But drawing pictures.
Interesting. I mean, we've had I think Ian and I have had a couple of conversations about like what constitutes work and what looks like work.
Yep.
Because I mean, I think we've all been in the situation where we're working from home, working from a coffee shop, you're doing stuff which doesn't necessarily look like work. And there was actually a really interesting just before Christmas where staff in the National Health Service in England were told not to drink coffee on their coffee break. That made them look like they were idle or something like that. Basically, stuff which they were entirely entitled to do on their while they're having a break. They were told not to do it because this would cast a bad light on them. And so I'm really interested when you say that in terms of what is possible, but what is kind of almost forbidden culturally, in terms of a mode of expression. That's really interesting.
Look, the key word there is culture, right? People are sheep, and they tend to copy what's around them generally, right? Certainly in the workplace, you know how you're going to be measured. Fair enough. You can see what's permissible and what's not permissible by looking around you generally. But I suppose I see just a wealth of digital potential that just isn't being tapped into. And looking at my own case, I'm doing is joining together some listening skills, some drawing skills, I suppose some facilitated thinking skills by being able to think on paper. And drawing's only just one part of it, but I'm able to move really fast because the same brain's doing the ideation as is doing the creation, I suppose. So, might you have better thoughts and better, visions than me, possibly, or might there be better drawers than me? Oh, most definitely.
So why aren't more people
joining them together is the dynamite?
Why don't people do this? Why aren't more people thinking creatively? Why aren't more people sitting there and sketching out stuff?
Well, I think creativity is almost a dirty word in the corporate space, and
in the classroom.
Well, possibly, certainly in the corporate space, you're more rewarded about clever things that you say, and clever emails that you write, and signs of making progress and keeping the people above you happy and keeping the people below you happy. You know what I mean? And I think creativity is a tough road as well, especially if you're going to be in any way innovative with the things you create. You open yourself up and you put it out there, just ready to be shot down. And I feel that with every drawing that I do, because I've also realized that some people engage and some people don't, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yeah.
And whenever you create an image, it makes sense to some people and it doesn't make sense to other people. And here, look, as long as it makes sense to some people, then that makes me happy, right? But I've got to keep reminding myself that actually there's always a contingent that don't get it, and that's okay. It's not their fault.
Well, that's the hard part.
But creativity needs to go hand in hand with that sort of almost pain, I suppose.
Well, talking about, you talked a couple times about things resonating or not, or pain. My students, I'm trying to get them to blog, and we're involved in the social media project now. And I said, hey, I consider myself to be a failed blogger. And I said, because you put some stuff out there, or you share stuff out on Twitter or something, and stuff resonates, and other stuff doesn't. And there's my colleague here will make fun of us. He'll say, like, you're looking for those notifications. You're looking for the Twitter ping or the notification in Google Plus, and if you don't see those, you sort of get a little bit depressed or melancholy, and then you strive to grab that. How does that affect you and the creative process?
Yeah, I think it really does. It really does affect, because I know exactly what you mean there. I'm trying to keep myself in check, that my ego, that this isn't just all about my ego. You know what I mean? That actually I am creating or trying to create value, and that value, is being grabbed by other people and is useful to them.
Well, are you thinking about an audience? Like, are you writing for a specific audience and trying to communicate something to the audience through your work?
Always. Now, sometimes that audience is very small. So sometimes it's about, here is a concept that needs to be understood, by a handful of people, and I've created an image that helps us to understand it, or helps us to think differently about it, or, I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I'm not looking for necessarily the sort of the big volume of people, agreeing with the thing I've created, or liking it. But it always has a purpose. Without any, I think that's why the life of an artist is so difficult. I don't really consider myself an artist, I suppose, but to wrestle with oneself to produce something, you know what I mean? You've got to have a purpose to produce something. So that's why meetings I find such a useful source of thinking, because generally the meeting has a purpose, and you're trying to get your teeth stuck into stuff. So, I've forgotten your original question.
Well, I was talking about, like, do you write for a certain audience? But it's making me think about, back to Doug's question about process. I mean, so you sit there, you're in the meeting, you're thinking about an audience, you're trying to talk to a certain group about a certain topic, and you're on the paper. Go ahead.
I'm not thinking about the audience whenever I'm drawing. It has to be said, even though I know that that's where the channel is, I suppose. I'm always just asking the paper, what does that look like? What does it look like? And I'm having this conversation with the paper, and I never know where I'm going to end up. But you start with something and you draw something else, and then you have another little thought, and and it spawns from that, and a bit like a mind map works, I suppose. It starts to sort of draw arms and legs, and then I often turn the page and try to rationalize that, to try to nail it in something that makes sense spatially, because it usually starts off as a total mess.
Yeah.
And then I look to myself and go, well, is there an asset in there that I need to draw? So is it a robot? Is it a rocket ship? Is it what is it? I might have that already drawn. I might need to draw that right now. And often there's a fork in the road there, because that, I can either get into putting a composition together using the Mac and some sort of Illustrator-esque software, or I can trust my hand and keep drawing, on the iPad and do it completely on the iPad. And sometimes that's a much better bet, as in trust your hand, see what it turns out like, and then you can decide whether it's good or not, or even tweak it on the Mac.
Well, I've got a couple of questions on that, actually. One of them I meant to ask you a couple of weeks ago. The first one is, and feel free to ignore one or just focus on one or two. But to what extent do you feel like you're bringing a programmer's mindset to the artistic process? And the reason I say that is because you talk a lot about having created assets and then bringing those in, whereas I guess a lot of artists will be making them from scratch. I don't know. And the second question is, to what extent you've ever done this drawing either on paper or digitally as part of a participatory collaborative process, as opposed to you by yourself, and how that's changed the logic of the situation. Okay,
well, let me take the second one first, because I've already forgotten the first one because I was focusing on the second one. But, I obviously in Wappy Sasa, in my non-profit, I've got a rookie who is just way better at drawing than I am. Right? He is just I love how his hand works. Right? But I found that whenever me and him start to collaborate, it's quite tricky. It's quite tricky because I actually really struggle to communicate fast enough with words. So it's like words is this little mini pipeline between my brain and his, right? Both of our, you really
bandwidth, yeah.
And it's just like a little tiny little pipeline, and it means that it just slows down the whole process, right? Of the subtleties that go into creating something, right? And if it's just me, obviously, I do stuff without thinking about it, because I am a product of my experiences, and yes, some of those experiences are things like programming and and whatnot. But life, all of life matters when it comes to creating something. I would say, and almost like you pour, your brain is an associative machine that can move very fast if you let it. I suppose. I'm making this up as I go along, by the way, but it seems to make sense to me as I say it.
No, it makes total sense. To me, I think what you just said was so powerful. All of life matters when you're creating something. I think part of the issue is we've taught ourselves not to pay attention to stuff. That certain stuff is stupid or not important, and I can't put words in your mouth, but you don't feel that way. It is those little things and the little nuance in life and the little, everything needs to be represented. Bring everything to bear. There you go.
I suppose you know what, I'm railing against my Northern Irish sort of religious upbringing, right? Which was very much a sort of a don't think for yourself, whatever you do. We've got this all figured out. It's a bunch of rules. You've just got to follow it, right? And then feel guilty whenever you slip up, right? And I think my journey in thinking, and then later on in drawing, is very, very influenced by, I think, the time I had at university, which was the opposite of my Northern Irish religious experience, which was very much a question everything, and disagree with stuff and wrestle with it and find some people who are in the same sort of boat who will help you do that. You know what I mean? And that has influenced, influenced me greatly, but influenced my creations in terms of what they're trying to say, but also of how I question the piece of paper and ask it, what it looks like and what could represent that as a metaphor, and to wrestle with it, I suppose.
So have you found, when you've done that, have you found a solution to that small pipeline creative process? Have you tried different tools? Have you tried different ways of working? Or is it just an intractable problem?
I suppose we've resolved to play different roles, right? So at the minute we're in Wappy Sasa, we have been commissioned to do an animation, right? And we've essentially divided it up. So he's really good at drawing faces, right? And I'm pretty good at drawing abstract things, right? And we knew each other well enough now that we can sort of divvy up the assets, and that we can collaborate on the actual animation and movement of the animation. But he's working in After Effects, and putting things together, having drawn lots of stuff on the iPad in terms of faces, and I'm doing the bits in between. And that, do you know what? It's delicious. It's absolutely delicious. It works really well, but it's very different from where I started, which was, hey, I've got a guy who can draw really well. I can think really fast. There's a pipeline between me and him that produces loads of stuff. Oh no, it doesn't. Because all those subtleties just get lost in that little, pipeline, as I mentioned. But playing to his strengths and playing to my strengths, in something that's bigger. Yeah, look, that seems to be working really well at the minute. But it's almost a different thing to where we started.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Sorry, Ian, go ahead.
Oh, Doug, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's really interesting that you seem to infer there that as you get to know each other better, your ability to be creative together improves as well, because and I'm putting words in your mouth here, and feel free to disagree, but you're learning like the ways you're more likely to represent stuff, the way that you think, creative constraints, all that kind of stuff. Is that fair to say?
That's very fair to say. I've never come across aggressive collaboration. I don't know if that exists. But yeah, you find ways of working together. I reckon, and yes, the more you know. The other thing I should mention is that obviously we're at Wabisasa. We take on 17 to 23-year-olds, so we're exclusively sort of looking at that age group. And the other thing I'm learning from that is that the people that we take on, the young people that we take on, they don't know where their talents might lie, right? We find it very hard to see where their talents might lie. But over the course of working with them and challenging them and getting them to do real business, which is what the model is because it's an agency on top, do you start to then see clues as to where those strengths may be? So I suppose we're always trying to push in different directions with these young people. But seriously, some of the things we've discovered 6 months in, we really couldn't have called, right back at the start. And that's just encouraged me so much. And indeed, I'm a living example of that. 2 years ago, if you asked me if I could have drawn, can you draw, Brian? I'd have said no. And I don't know. And if I look back, the clues were there, right? But I didn't pick up on them. My school didn't pick up on them. I suppose my parents or my family or the people around me didn't pick up on them. It's not their fault either. You know what I mean? It's just that I think we're part of a fairly narrow system. And I think just because I'm good at maths and good at sciences, that's the road that I went on. And my brother was ahead of me, and he went on there too. And almost this was just totally missed. Totally. And yet I find so much satisfaction in drawing thoughts.
So I mean, it seems like before you said it's an interrogation between you and the paper. You're talking with the paper to make sense of what you're seeing, and just the same way that I would sit here with like Evernote and bang out notes, or some people would sketch stuff or do a graphic organizer. You're talking with the paper to figure out what sense all of this makes. And then the challenge is, it must be so challenging to collaborate with others in that and create that pipeline. Is that why you would ultimately move from like paper to pixel, like move to the iPad? Like why did you start using the iPad? And like I look at the sketchbook, but what's the process there?
Well, you see, the iPad offers you something different, right? And the app I tend to use in the iPad, and there's a bunch of them, but the app I've got to know very well is Paper, Paper by 53, right? And but look, here's the trick: it allows you to undo, right? A piece of paper, it doesn't really allow you to undo. Obviously you can draw stuff in pencil and whatnot, right? But that made all the difference. It made all the difference, because what did that allow me to do? It allowed me to try something 10 times, and for me to undo and undo and undo until I got it right. Right? And that, again, you can't do that on paper, but you can be a bluffer. And I've also been very influenced by this sort of 10,000 hours thing that Malcolm Gladwell talks about, right? The amount of talent, when you look at someone, look at a superstar, the amount of talent is a lot less than you think it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? The amount of hard work is a lot more than you think it is. We tend to describe people as just really naturally gifted and whatever. Nonsense. You know what I mean? They might well have good genes and whatever else, but there's just so much that is just discipline, practice, hard work, right? And the undo function on the iPad allowed me to practice, I suppose. Allowed me to practice fast and produce results faster, and to be rubbish at drawing and yet to get what I was trying to get out, but because I could undo until I got it right. And that was why iPad.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because I can remember as a child growing up playing, I don't know, things like Secret of Monkey Island, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, and making sure that you always saved your game when you're going to a tricky bit, so that you could keep on going time and time and time again. And that's part of the 10,000 hours thing, isn't it? Like knowing when you're hitting a bit which you're testing your limits, and then being able to do the Control Z thing, and then like redoing it time and time again. And that's not necessarily an artistic thing, like you say. That's almost like an engineering mindset.
That's right. Like it's what was I going to say there? It's I think that the thing is you need a purpose to do it. You know what I mean? I'm a great believer in purpose anyway, right? But you need to have some sort of inspiration, or to have, again, my drawing comes out of frustration. Why aren't these people listening to me? You know what I mean? When it's clear in my head, I need to produce. That was the purpose that sort of made me, want to undo 10 times to get it done. So it's not just about sort of I'm going to sit down and practice how to draw stuff. You've got to have a need, I think, to sort of a burning need to make you, spend hours at a thing. I don't think it makes any difference whether that's table tennis or, or anything else.
Because you've learned how to draw, and you've learned, I don't know how long ago, to program as well. I don't know if you can remember your first steps in programming, etc. But to what extent were they the same, and how were they different?
I think there were definitely similarities. I learned how to program around about age 10 because my mum, who was a physics teacher, bought a ZX Spectrum, or a ZX81 as it was actually, and then we got a ZX Spectrum after that. So, fairly early on home computer, and we got some magazines, and you start typing them in, and I was captivated by it, and because we didn't believe in buying games, like all my other friends, I started tinkering around. So it was very experimental. No one was telling me to do anything. It was tinkering. It was mucking around. It was making. And that's the same me that was drawing in iPad, that was tinkering. I wonder if I could use this thing to explain this thing. Well, if it looked like that, and I wonder, I'll just bounce that off someone. Hey, Mom, look at this totally pointless program I've written. Oh, that's good, son. What's that for? I've no idea. Isn't it brilliant? So there are definite crossovers. I suppose I'd probably describe myself as an experientialist, or at least other people have described me like that. So I do need to experience stuff, and I suppose it's the curiosity that goes with that. But interestingly, I lost that programming at secondary school because it just wasn't seen or picked up or facilitated, or maybe we just didn't have the computers or whatever, right? And it wasn't until I rediscovered it at university, because the university I went to, you had to do 3 subjects even though you applied to do 2. So I applied to do maths and physics, and never even thought about computing, and then had to choose this extra one. And as soon as I found computing again, I was just like, oh, where have you been? Where have you been? So, and it was that creativity that came with computing that didn't come with maths and physics. And I think people misjudge coding a lot by thinking it's, if you're good at maths, you're good at coding. And there may be some strength to that, but the best programmers I know are creative programmers. They're problem solvers.
Problem solving, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, I think Ian's got some thoughts on this too, but just because I wanted to follow up that particular point, I've been diving into some work some research behind some work that Mozilla did last year around kind of careers and badges and pathways and all that kind of stuff. Stuff influenced by game design, actually. Chloe Validi, Lucas Blair, Grania Hamilton. I can share it with you. But something it mentions in that document, which I've been going through today, is Holland codes. I've never come across this. And the only reason I mention it is because I don't know how realistic and or spurious the research is, but the idea is fascinating, that there's certain personality types or ways of approaching the world, which means that you're more likely to have a certain mix of skills mixed with a temperament or personality which gives you to a certain field. And the thing which I found fascinating about that, because obviously you'd think that was spurious from the outset, is that it puts together things that you wouldn't necessarily think would go together. So, for example, carpentry with being an astronomer, or being a graphic designer with being a nurse, and all those kinds of things. And I think what you've been describing there in terms of like coding and programming and artist kind of work, things that you think would usually be almost polar opposites, are a lot closer than you would usually think, and similar approaches too.
yeah, and look, this takes us back to, the idea of a polymath. You know what I mean? And again, another problem I have with our education system, that it doesn't really, I think, support that. That idea that you can be brilliant at maths and brilliant at music and have an interest in poetry too. You know what I mean? That's hey, learning is learning, and the field, the landscape is wide. You know what I mean? And that it's not just chopped up into these narrow little disciplines that either, oh, you're a sciencey person or you're good at languages. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's that the older I get, the more I get bothered by that, I have to say. Yeah.
So how do you make this happen? I want to talk more about your nonprofit, and I want to talk more about the work that you're doing, but how do you bring this into a classroom? You know what I mean? How do we make this process happen in the classroom?
Well, I have an idea, right, that I haven't managed to do anything with, because Wabi Sasa, my non-profit, actually is two ideas hand in hand, right? One idea was a sort of a new form of apprenticeship, a sort of a fluid, business-driven form of apprenticeship, right? And the other was schools focused, okay? And the vision I had was that I don't know if it was the same in your school, but in my school back in Northern Ireland, which it was a good school, can't fault it really. Well, they had a mini company, right? So the brightest and best would sort of form this enterprise company, and they would think of a product, and they would get the product produced and get advertising from the local paper or whatever else, and then they would sell it to the parents, and they would make a profit, and they would have learned a whole load of stuff. And sure enough, they did learn a whole load of stuff, but it only appealed, or the only people that seemed to be involved there were the people who had already figured out a bunch of stuff and were socially forward and were the brightest and the good, right? Now, I wasn't one of the brightest and the good, and I sort of, my vision was, well, how would I reach Brian's inside Brian's school? You know what I mean? And how could I reach inside and get them building stuff? And it's this lovely Mozilla maker sort of stuff idea, right? Where, well, my idea was, could I, connect that world inside school of a group of techies getting together. And I say techies, and you forgive that phrase, right? But I suppose a few interested people getting together and responding to a brief, right? A brief that came in from the outer world, right? The world of commerce, the world of business, and that it was an innovation competition, essentially, that organized in little teams in schools, that but yet not part of a curriculum, and that they could get together and think and be mentored as well, I suppose, by someone who did have experience of that outside world, but to also be exposed to, the problems that business have that potentially young people could solve, right? And I haven't taken that idea anywhere, but I think there is a potential there in terms of doing something that's below the surface, so that it doesn't form a class or is maybe more like a sort of a self-organized sort of mini club type vibe in a school, but that it's also linked directly to the outer world of building real stuff for real people, because I think that's what sometimes really is missing from our education, right? So maths is a perfect example of that. Math, I read a quote the other day, I'm going to have to do a drawing of it, but maths is taught like a dead language. I just thought that's brilliant. That's exactly what it's taught like. It's taught like Latin, as if it's just something you've got to grin and bear it because someone thought it was a good idea to teach it, And yet, maths is the best logical system of figuring out, sort of how things work that we've got. And this idea of creative mathematics, to me, which is just totally absent, but yet, wouldn't it be great if it existed? I've sort of lost my train of thought there. Somebody jump in and save me.
Well, so how does that work in your nonprofit?
So how does what?
How does all that work in your nonprofit? How do you make, teaching and learning and stuff that kids should love come alive for them?
Well, so I've employed a couple of guys. One on his ability to solve a Rubik's Cube, right? Because I thought that was as good a diagnostic as any, in terms of the sort of the persistent and the algorithmic mind maybe that a programmer would require. And I'm exposing him to real stuff.
He could solve a Rubik's Cube?
Sorry, what's that?
You hired him because he could solve a Rubik's Cube?
Yeah, well, I hired him because he had dropped out of the education system and he could solve a Rubik's Cube and he had built his own computer. And I thought that even though he didn't think he could be a programmer, I thought he could be.
Yeah.
Because I thought there were two pretty good clues there that weren't credentials, and that's what, again, that's why I believe in open badges, because that stuff matters, right? The stuff that's not A levels, GCSEs, or whatever other qualifications you get, it matters, right? And are clues to the real person underneath, rather than the system that sits on top of them, I think. But I convinced him that actually I thought he would make a very good programmer, and employed him and exposed him to, I suppose, the real problems that businesses have and the real things that they need built, as well as did that in a safe environment. So he's got a mentor, he's got people who do know what they're doing. So it's not you're on your own, buddy, sink or swim. But it's real stuff in a safe environment, and that's all it is. And do what seems to be working for that guy.
I think that's part of it, is just creating that safe environment where people, students, can take a risk. You created that safe environment for yourself. Now it's trying to find, either create that or make a student believe or another person believe that they can do this, that they can be creative, that they're not going to be kooky if they are sitting around drawing and stuff like that.
I think confidence is a key word here. I've only realized that recently, but I think young people can be extremely creative, but often they are shut down, and what they think they should be sort of getting out there sort of has already been switched off by the system. I think with confidence and with encouragement, I think you can go a long way, with young people. And I'm sure you guys can think back to the people who reached into your lives, and gave you that encouragement at the right time. And they were the people that sort of got you right back on a path and probably helped you be the person you are today. I think that maybe it's as simple as that. Anyway.
And it never ends. It never ends. It's Doug's trying to get me to use GitHub. I'm trying to figure out how to code. I'm trying to learn how to, do last year's Minecraft or this year's Minecraft and stop motion animation, and it's trying to figure out how do we make all this stuff work. So you can always, an old dog can learn new things. Now there's a glitch in the matrix. So we have Doug twice. So Brian, as we close out, how do we get in touch with you? How do we follow you online? Where do we learn more? Tell us more about the nonprofit. What can we do there? What opportunities are out there?
Well, I suppose the best way to keep in touch with what I'm doing is through my Twitter account. which is at Brian M. Mathers. And because Doug told me to, I'm just creating something at the minute that is going to be a little bit more of a place to get in contact, a connection between the stuff that I produce and store on Flickr and the channels that I use to sort of to get it out there. So, and as soon as that's up and running, I'll let you know.
Very cool. Very cool.
Can I just make one final thing, which has just come to me actually after Brian mentioning that? So, firstly, please, if you're doing any kind of awesome work like this and you're putting it out into a stream, please have a canonical place to put your stuff that people can link to. It's extremely helpful. And secondly, a few years ago, a guy who I know called Vinay Gupta talked about how doing like a 2-minute video overview about what you do and why it's important to other people is like, he said that's going to be the new big thing. And it hasn't really caught on yet, but I've just remembered that he wrote that a few years ago, and I am going to do that, and I think it's a really important thing for everyone to do.
So a 2-minute video about who you are and what you do and why it's important?
And how it connects to other people's work.
Yeah, so like a 2-minute commercial about yourself.
Yeah, basically.
I like that.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by the canonical place?
So when you've heard me say this a few times before, and it's what I was trying to push Brian to do. Like having a URL for every important thing that you do. And yes, there's a Twitter link for everything that Brian's done and a Flickr link and stuff, but one place that you can share with someone so that if I say you've got to see Brian's work, here's the link, instead of having to share like 10 links and stuff.
So like
and I think we're all guilty of this. Yeah, we're all guilty of this, but a canonical place that links out to all of the things that you do. Really
Where do you? What sort of tool do you recommend building that in, or does it matter?
I don't think it matters as long as it's got a nice short URL that people can remember.
Very cool. Very cool. Brian, thanks a lot for joining us. You know, I love your work. This is going to force me to sit down, power up the iPad, grab my little tiny tyke. We can draw together. I'll share his stuff online. My stuff I'll immediately delete. And now you're really pushing me to think, you know, outside the box. Any last words of wisdom for everybody out there?
Well, listen. Look, it's been a real pleasure. It's been a real pleasure just shooting the breeze with you guys, I suppose. But you know, it's. I think just one last thing is it's when you put your mind to it, it's amazing what you can do. And I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about the young people that I see in terms of how fast they can grow in how short a space of time. Yeah, thinking for yourself, it's underrated.
Well said. I want to go back and like transcribe this thing. You have about 35 quotes that I was just like, oh yeah, I need it. I need that for later. I need that for later. So very cool. Doug, last words? Really? What? No, take that back.
You're muted. You're muted.
I think he also froze himself again.
Oh man.
It's a glitch in the matrix. There he goes. He's popping up again.
Sorry, Google doesn't like me. There's a wonderful website called castingwords.com. It uses Amazon Mechanical Turk. It's reasonably priced for projects and stuff, and it sends it out to lots of different translators and transcribers and stuff, and you can get it done really quickly. And if you've ever got a project where you actually need to do that, it's really, really useful.
I'll definitely check it out. Very cool. Well, this was a fun way to get started. Back up again. What we'll do is probably in the next couple of weeks we'll have another episode. We'll bring Brian back on and we'll shoot the breeze again. Talk about some of these bigger issues.
That'd be great.
And with that, I'll kill off the